Yo, what's up guys, Alf here, and today I'm going to be doing a new video in the Under the Meta series where I have a look at a deck that I think is very strong and has a lot of potential, but isn't quite top tier for whatever reason. Going to be breaking down all the card choices, the weaknesses and how they could potentially be addressed going forwards, and then I've got some gameplay at the end so you guys can see the deck in action. And also, if you want to try the list out for yourself, there'll be an importable deck list down in the description as well. But anyway, with that all out of the way, this is my Simic Heirloom Eldrazi deck in Historic. Now obviously with the recent BNR, Eldrazi took a really big hit in terms of both speed and consistency with the Eldrazi Temple ban, which did make me worry about the viability of the deck because you're still going to be soft to the same aggro and combo decks that pre-BNR Eldrazi struggled against, and then obviously the lack of speed and consistency does make me worry about how it can compete against the interactive decks as well. But if we look at how the format's kind of shaping out, I think right now the two best decks in the format are Dimir and Jund. I think the Eldrazi Temple ban has really opened up the format to the more fair, slower, grindy interactive decks, which means that I think one of the best decks to counteract that is Eldrazi, right? We saw in the past that Dimir and Jund were the sort of decks that Eldrazi tends to prey on naturally because, a lot of your acceleration comes via your lands, or a lot of your creatures have cast triggers, means it's difficult to interact with. And, Kozek's Command is one of the most powerful cards in the entire format, and especially if you can resolve this against Dimir or Jund, you're going to pull massively ahead if you can just resolve it out of nowhere, which is a really big deal. And not only that, but I also think Dimir and Jund being the two most popular decks also tends to push out a lot of the decks that Eldrazi is weak against, right? I think it's very risky to run decks like Is It Wizards or Auras or any sort of combo deck right now when Dimir and Jund are there with a bunch of discard spells and counter spells and a lot of cheap removal and ways to rebuy that removal and, sweepers post sideboard. So I do think that in theory, Eldrazi should be relatively well positioned in the format right now, whilst Dimir and Jund are two of the best decks in the format. And I also think two of the cards that we got from the latest Alchemy set in Adherence, Heirloom and Necro and Cavern also give the deck an added grind element that they didn't have in previous builds. So going to start off by having a look at those. So Echo and Cavern is basically replacing Eldrazi Temple here, which is obviously trading speed for a grind game, but in the current format I think that's a pretty decent trade to be making. Obviously we would run Eldrazi Temple if it was legal, but this is, while it's not, it's a decent replacement because it, helps fix your mana in the same way that an Unclaimed Territory does. But then you also have this exhaust ability where you can pay for and tap it to seek an Eldrazi, which does include Kozek's Command. This is pretty huge. Being able to find your most powerful card more consistently is a really big deal, but it can also obviously find your Devourer, your Null Drifter, and your Sire of Seven Deaths. And this is a really big deal because having this as a 4 in your deck that you can get off pretty early as well, right? We are a ramp deck, so getting to 4 mana is pretty easy, especially ahead of curve in this deck. So even if the opponent is able to trade 1-for-1 with your stuff with discard spells or whatnot, or you have a Sire so you don't get cast trigger and the opponent counters it, we can then just use our mana on Echo and Cavern, seek an Eldrazi, and then it just gives us a way to grind into those longer games. It's especially nice against Jund as well because we can do this during our end step, which means that it can completely dodge discard spells, which is their main way to preemptively get rid of our top end, especially stuff that has cast triggers that, means that it's not great for the opponent to use 1-for-1 spot removal against it. So Echo and Cavern in the mana base just basically gives you ways to grind into longer games, which is a really big deal. And then Adherence Heirloom is basically here replacing Sowing Micah Spawn that I'm going to talk about in a second. It's a 3-mana rock. It can only tap for mana to cast your creatures, so unfortunately can't be used to cast Kozek's Command or other acceleration or interaction, unfortunately. But the main thing we're trying to do in this deck is accelerate into our 7-drops. But more importantly, it also seeks a 7-drop when it enters the battlefield. So same thing with Echo and Cavern. It's basically a piece of ramp that also helps you find your top end more consistently, which gives you more ways to grind against those sort of 1-for-1 removal decks. And obviously, even outside of that, it's just good for your proactive game plan. And if we do compare this to Sowing Micah Spawn, right, I did have Micah Spawn in early builds of the deck that I was trying, but with the Eldrazi Temple ban, I do think Micah Spawn has become quite a bit worse. I still think it's a decent card to run, especially if you wanted to be able to choose specific lands, but pre-BNR, Micah Spawn could very consistently get you from 4 to 6 mana, which is a really big deal because you go Micah Spawn with 4 mana, get an Eldrazi Temple, and then assuming you have your land for the turn, you can just immediately cast your 7-drop the next turn. Obviously, now with Ugin's Labyrinth as the only soul land, that sequence basically never happens anymore because if you do go Sowing Micah Spawn, get Ugin's Labyrinth and Imprint, you would then need a second 7-drop in your hand to be able to cast it the following turn, which isn't that consistent. Not to mention, I've had a lot of situations where I just cast Micah Spawn without a 7-drop in my hand, meaning we're only going from 4 to 5 mana. So I like cutting Micah Spawn from the deck. It does mean that we lose access to Cavern of Souls as a tutor target and Bajuka Bog and Sanctum of Ugin, which is obviously a downside there, especially when we're running Sire of Seven Deaths, which it would be useful to have Cavern of Souls spells for that, but I just much prefer Adherence Heirloom. First of all, because it's a mana cheaper, which is a really big deal with both Ugin's Labyrinth and Utopia Sprawl, right? It's going to be quite a common curve out to go turn 1 Utopia Sprawl, then turn 2 Adherence Heirloom, or turn 1 Ugin's Labyrinth, turn 2 Adherence Heirloom. You get this down a turn sooner than sowing Mica Spawn, which is a really big deal. Then it does provide immediate acceleration at basically the same rate that Mica Spawn would, outside of that one situation where you happen to have 2 7-drops in a Labyrinth. And another slight upside of it as well is that it means that the Heirloom and the Echoing Cavern are going to find much more high-impact targets every single time, right? If you ran Mica Spawn instead of the Heirloom or instead of an Ugin's Binding or whatever, then Echoing Cavern can hit Mica Spawn. And it's not to say Mica Spawn is a bad hit, because obviously once you do have a lot more mana, you can start kicking it to exile the opponent's lands, but I found that not as relevant for the most part in the current format, because the Eldrazi mirrors aren't very popular, land decks in general aren't as popular anyway, so hitting the opponent's lands isn't as big. And obviously, outside of that, you would much rather hit your 7-drops as well. So cutting Mica Spawn from the deck also means your hits off Heirloom and Cavern are better as well. So just going to go over the other cards in the deck as well. Now, obviously, Utopia Sprawl has been a mainstay in Eldrazi, and we do want as much early acceleration as possible. It does come with some cost in the mana base, because we aren't running as many colorless lands as we probably want for Kozilek's Command, but having Utopia Sprawl on turn 1 does enable some of the best starts in the deck, so definitely worth running here. Malevolent Rumble, obviously another acceleration that can also find your top end, it can find Heirloom, it can find your lands, which is a really big deal. And also with Ugin's Binding in the deck, milling over Ugin's Binding and finding Null Drifter is one of the best starts that you can have, especially against go wide decks, because, you know, getting Null Drifter evoked on turn 3 and immediately bouncing the opponent's whole board because you milled over an Ugin's Binding is a really big deal. And this is an interaction have been very impressed with post BNR. There are a lot more, grindier decks in the format, and being able to just bounce the opponent's board gives you a way to kind of level the playing field in that sort of matchup. So that's one of the reasons I'm running 4 as opposed to 3 Ugin's Binding, which was typically the stock in the past, because I found this interaction, while the format is slower, a really effective way to get back from behind. Talisman obviously was a staple in previous builds, but I find it even more important right now with Harbinger and Magus. Obviously, one of the other downsides of running Eldrazi right now is that those sorts of land hoses are around, which does limit the, how good cards like Ugin's Labyrinth are. But having said that, we do have Talisman, we do have Adherence Heirloom, we do have ways to get around that, and Talisman being able to not only produce colorless, but also fix your mana in the face of those sort of land hoses is a really big deal. Kozilek's Command, shouldn't have to talk about this, it's just one of the best cards in the entire format, and is definitely the best card in this archetype. Obviously does lose a bit of speed with not having Eldrazi Temple anymore, but it's still an absolute 4 of such a good card in this deck. Ugin's Binding sort of talked about this already, but I do feel once the format slowed down, there's kind of a lot more grindy decks seeing play right now. I've seen a resurgence in Devotion, because I think that's a reasonably effective way to grind against those interactive decks. Obviously, I think it's probably worse against them than Eldrazi in general, because you have, a better matchup against the more linear decks, because you do have some main deck interaction. But just in general, I found while the format's slower, having Ugin's Binding as a way to reset the board against the opponent is really effective. It does give you more, spot removal early on as well. But like I said, using this with Null Drifter to just reset the board is a really big deal. So I wanted to run 4 of, because I found it to be very effective in the current format. And then in terms of the 7-drops, Devourer is kind of a staple, because it's not only gives you really good coverage for interaction, but the kind of once upon a time style effect to help fix your early sort of draws is a really big deal, especially helping you find your Ugin's Labyrinth, helping you find your Utopia Sprawl more consistently. And then there are a lot of sideboard cards that are very important to find in certain matchups as well. So the fixing off this is really huge as well. Null Drifter, again, absolute staple if you're in blue. It's basically the reason to be running Ugin's Binding. Means you don't get stuck with a bunch of uncastable 7-drops in the early game, because you can draw it as well. Very nice with Torpor or post-sideboard as well. So Null Drifter, absolute staple here as well. And then finally, we've got Sire of 7 Deaths, and this was one I was going back and forward on, because I think one of the main reasons to run Eldrazi are creatures with cast triggers, because then, it doesn't matter if the opponent has a counter spell or a piece of spot removal, you're still going to 2-for-1 the opponent. Whereas Sire, obviously, if you cast this and the opponent counter spells it, or you cast it and they have a piece of removal, it's not great. But for the most part, we've got Devourer that doesn't care about counter spells, we've got Null Drifter that doesn't care about counter spells, and if you don't have Sire in your main deck, you're really, really going to struggle against the aggressive decks, especially decks like Is It Wizards or Burn that I have faced quite a lot recently. And like I said, even if you are against Dimir, you have Devour and Null that have cast triggers. You can cast these first to try and bait out their interaction. Even if they do have a counterspell for Sai, you have Echoing Cavern that can hopefully help you grind into the longer game, find another one, for example. And then, outside of counterspell decks, if you're against Jund, the only commonly played piece of interaction that they run that can kill Sire is Snuff Out, which deals 11 damage to them. So if they don't have Snuff Out immediately and you get in for one hit, or they've taken damage off their mana base, sometimes they won't have enough life to pay for that. So I found for the most part, Sire is just a generically powerful card that massively improves your aggro matchup. And so I like running it in the main deck, even though it is slightly soft to Dimir. If you wanted to really punish Dimir and Jund, you could potentially run Worldbreaker in this slot in the main deck and then run Sire in the sideboard, but you're losing 3 or 4 sideboard slots in order to do that. I don't feel like Worldbreaker is particularly great right now. Obviously hitting the opponent's land is nice, but there aren't that many artifacts or enchantments that are particularly important to remove right now. So for improving your matchups against the uninteractive decks, especially aggro, I felt like Sire is worth it game 1, especially when we have Devourer, Null Drifter, Echoing Cavern, Adherence Heirloom, Kozilek's Command as ways to kind of pull ahead in the grindy matchups as well. Then in terms of the mana base, 24 lands here, and we've got 14 forests for the Utopia Sprawl, which is really important, right? We've got the 2 forests, the Breeding Pool, Multiversal Passage also counts as a forest if you put it on green, and then Prismatic Vista. And then for the Vista, we've obviously got an island to be able to get blue, and a Wastes, which is especially important right now in the face of, Harbinger and Magus of the Moon. If you have an early Talisman, then it's always a good idea to get Waste against the Landhoser decks, because then you have access to Kozilek's Command even through the Landhosers, which is a pretty big deal. And then outside of that, we've just got Ugin's Labyrinth and Echoing Cavern. Like I said, with Sire of 7 Deaths, you could obviously, try and run Cavern of Souls in place of Echoing Cavern. But if you look at the mana base, if you want to run Utopia Sprawl, which I think is kind of mandatory in order to have enough early acceleration, the only land that you could really cut to run for of Cavern of Souls is Echoing Cavern. And I think Cavern of Souls is only better than Echoing Cavern with exactly Sire of 7 Deaths. And the Echoing Cavern exhaust, first of all, it just increases your range of keepable hands, right? You can keep a hand without a 7-drop with Echoing Cavern if you have acceleration, and then you can just accelerate, exhaust your Echoing Cavern, find top end, and then cast it. So it's not only good in the grindy matchups, it also increases your range of keepable hands. So I don't think it's worth running Cavern of Souls just for Sire of 7 Deaths, but if you really wanted to, if you are specifically worried about Dimir, that is a change that you could consider, but I don't really advise it. So that's the main deck overall. Obviously, there's nothing too crazy going on in terms of innovation. A lot of this list is very similar to what we've seen in the past, but I do think in the grindy, slower format, Echoing Cavern is a reasonable replacement for Eldrazi Temple, and I've liked Adherence Heirloom as a replacement for Microspawn, like I said earlier as well. And then in terms of the sideboard, this is quite a bit different to builds we've seen in the past, because obviously the format is quite different to pre-BNR. So first of all, we've got 3 copies of Ghost Vacuum, which is my graveyard hate of choice. I really like Ghost Vacuum right now because it's just good as, graveyard hate against the very all-in graveyard decks like, is it Phoenix and Reanimator and stuff like that. But it's also especially good in this list because, again, we're a ramp deck. We can get to 6 mana pretty early. And if you do just keep exiling the opponent's creatures from the graveyard, this does also double up as a win condition as well, which is pretty nice. And additionally, I think repeatable graveyard hate is also very nice against the Jund decks right now because you can keep the opponent off recasting stuff with Jarsil. If the opponent doesn't have Malevolent Rumble, you can also shrink their Goyfs down very early on if you get this on turn 1 as well. And additionally, if you have a look at the curve, we are kind of missing stuff at the 1 mana slot as well, so having more one drops post sideboard is very nice. And then we've got 2 copies of Pithing Needle, which I think is very nice to have against combo decks. I've seen a resurgence of Shifting Woodland, Yawgmoth, decks like that have one card that really takes over the game if it's not dealt with, and having Pithing Needle as another 1-drop to kind of smooth out the curve post sideboard that also gives you more counterplay against combo decks, which is one of the most difficult matchups for Eldrazi, is a really big deal. And then 4 copies of Test of Talents might look weird, but I do feel, again, like I want to have sideboard slots specifically for combo, and a lot of the creature combo decks we have good answers to in the form of Torpor Orb, Dismember, and Kozilek's Command. So it's mainly non-creature combo decks that I'm worried about, and Aquatic Subtlety is still seeing play. I've still seen Valakut with Scape Shift. I've seen a couple of Lotus Field as well, and all of those decks have key cards. Test of Talents being able to basically extract Aquatic Subtlety, extract Scape Shift, extract Hidden Strings against those sorts of decks has felt really good to me. So I basically post sideboard want to have good answers for the combo decks, and like I said, we have good answers for the creature combo decks. So Test of Talents is basically here for the non-creature combo decks. Now obviously it's a bit annoying that it doesn't hit more fringe stuff like Charbelcher, but I don't feel like that deck is very well positioned at all in the Dimir Jund metagame, so you're very unlikely to see it. So against the non-creature combo decks that you're most likely to see, Test of Talents is really good against the majority of them. And then 2 copies of Torpor Orb, which, again, is going to be really good against the ETB creature combo decks, stuff like Samwise, stuff like Yawgmoth. But I also find it very effective against Jund as well, because Pyrogoyf is the main way that they can go over the top of you. They really struggle to beat you just in terms of a flat-out fair game plan. But, like I said, if they can get Pyrogoyf down and then start doming you with a bunch of damage early on, that's really difficult to beat. So Pyrogoyf as the main card that we're worried about, shutting it off with Torpor Orb is really nice. And then also, it works incredibly well with Null Drifter, right? The amount of times I've gone imprint Ugin's Labyrinth into Torpor Orb turn 1, into evoke Null Drifter turn 2, draw 2, and then get to keep the Null Drifter in play is such a broken curve out and really difficult for most decks to beat, especially decks that their proactive game plan does get hurt by Torpor Orb. And then 4 copies of Dismember, really important. First of all, against the aggressive decks, right? Post sideboard, we have 4 Dismember, 4 Kozak's Command, 4 Ugin's Binding, which is a pretty reasonable amount of interaction to help, improve those tricky matchups against decks like Auras. But it's also very important against the land hoses as well. Having an answer for Harbinger, Magus is really important. Additionally, against the Goyf decks, you can shrink stuff like Pyrogoyf down so it doesn't deal as much damage, even if it doesn't kill it. And it can also be used to take out stuff like Jarsel as well to stop their proactive game plan. So Dismember not only good against the aggressive decks, but also very important to be able to kill the land hose as well. So that's the deck overall. Like I said, obviously Eldrazi has lost speed, which is an issue, but while the format is very interactive right now and the fast aggro and fast combo decks aren't as popular because of the interactive decks and the pickups of Adherence, Heirloom, and Echo and Cavern, I do think the deck can definitely hang in the current format, but there are definitely some weaknesses that are holding it back as well. So for me, the biggest issue with the deck is just that it takes a while to close the game out, right? You're very good at stabilizing the board with cards like Ugin's Binding, Devourer, Sire, and Kozak's Command, but it usually takes you a few turns to actually close the game out, which is especially a problem against decks that have somewhat of a combo aspect, right? Even decks that aren't dedicated combo, like Yawgmoth, for example, if you give them enough time, they will find 2 Young Wolves plus a Blood Artist and just be able to kill you that way. Even against decks like Affinity or Jund against Affinity, if you give them enough time, they'll set up Emery plus Drix Interlacer with counterspells and then get Kappa Cannoneers down to bypass what you've got on board. Even against decks like Jund, you're decent at grinding against most of their stuff, but game 1, you really don't have good options to stop Pyrogoyf, so even if you are ahead on board, the opponent can go Pyrogoyf, ping you, another Goyf ping you, and Ugin's Binding isn't particularly effective against them because then you're bouncing their Goyfs to reuse the ETBs against. So I do think that's an issue. And there aren't really great solutions either. I think, pre-BNR, the solution to that was to just run the aggro builds, but I don't think they're particularly viable or good right now. I think the aggro builds really, really lost the most with the Eldrazi Temple ban because the whole viability of those decks relied on being able to cast your Linebreaker and your Fleshraker on turn 2, which is so much harder now, right? I was running builds with Eldrazi Temple and Crop Rotation and Ugin's Labyrinth as your main ways to do it. Now, Eldrazi Temple's gone, Crop Rotation's gone, which means the only way you can consistently cast them on turn 2 is Utopia Sprawl, which I'm not a massive fan of in the aggressive builds because it's really difficult to run enough forests and have enough colourless lands for your other cards as well. And then for Ugin's Labyrinth, it's really difficult to run Linebreaker, Fleshraker, and also, 12 7-drops for Ugin's Labyrinth as well. So I think the viability of those decks was hurt massively with the Eldrazi Temple ban. Not to mention, I also think in the Dimir and Jund dominated format, those sorts of builds don't trade particularly well against those sorts of decks either because Linebreaker, Fleshraker, they just die immediately to Fatal Push and Abrupt Decay and, Snuff Out without providing any value. They just trade 1 for 1 there. And if you don't have Cavern of Souls, they trade with counterspells really poorly as well. I think, the main reason to return to Eldrazi was the cast triggers, which the aggressive decks don't get to use as often, if that makes sense. So I don't think that's a particularly good solution. The other solution I could think of is maybe running some Emrakul the Promised End in the deck, maybe over Sire of 7 Deaths, but the main issue with that is that I just feel like it's really difficult to consistently set that up, right? You could maybe replace Sire with 4 copies of Emrakul the Promised End, but the issue then is you're going to be in so many situations where you have 7 mana that you could use to cast a Sire of 7 Deaths, but you don't have, it's much more difficult to get to, 9 or 10 mana to cast an Emrakul the Promised End, especially now we don't have Eldrazi Temple. Now, in the past, you could potentially use Sanctum of Ugin to shoot a Sire of 7 Deaths, but in order to do that, you would typically need Sowing Mycospawn Spawn in place of the Adherence Heirloom, and then you'd go Mycospawn, get Sanctum of Ugin, cast a 7-drop, crack the Sanctum, get your 1 of Emrakul. But that's quite a convoluted way to set it up, and also way more difficult to do now without Eldrazi Temple, right? Because it's, if you go 4 mana, Sowing Mycospawn, get Sanctum of Ugin, you're still 2 mana away from getting a 7-drop, which is way more difficult to do without Eldrazi Temple now. So I think if you were to do that, you'd probably have to run quite a different build that's much more dedicated around Emrakul the Promised End. I've been trying a few builds with Ice-Till Explorer recently, so maybe you could run a build with Ice-Till and Emrakul, but then you're much more vulnerable to early interaction because Ice-Till Explorer gets hit by counter spells, gets hit by creature removal, doesn't have a cast trigger either, is 4 mana as opposed to 3 for Adherence Heirloom. So running those sorts of builds come with their own risks as well. So the way I see it, not to mention as well, obviously that, Emrakul can also get hit by counter spells even if you get the cast trigger. So I'm not sure there's a great solution in terms of that. If you do have a good solution, definitely let me know in the comments. But the way I see it, every, thing you could do to try and run a more game-winning Eldrazi in terms of Emrakul comes with more risks in terms of the early setup or the changes you would need to make in order to enable that, if that makes sense. So that is one issue that I'm not sure is really solvable, probably just something that you have to deal with if you're running Eldrazi in the current format. And then the other weaknesses is mainly just the same ones that we've known about. You're still probably unfavored against the fast aggro and fast combo decks. Now, having said that, I do think we've got more options in the sideboard, right? It's really nice to not have to run Chalice of the Void anymore because obviously energy isn't a thing or isn't as popular anymore. Val combo basically doesn't exist anymore, and so there are way fewer decks that gets hurt by Chalice, which opens up more sideboard options. So like I said, against creature combo, we do have Torpor and Dismember, so that's not much of an issue, but other combo decks that are more resilient, right? If you come up against a Lotus Field, for example, sure, you can test the talents, their hidden strings, but, I've seen multiple new builds that are running Manamorphose in order to get around stuff like Alpine Moon, so they have ways to counteract that. And in general, like I said, the first weakness is it takes a while to close the game out, which is beneficial for especially the pseudo combo decks like Yawgmoth, for example. So those are the main weaknesses. Takes a while to close the game out, which is bad against decks that can go over the top of you, and you're still probably slightly unfavored against the aggro and combo decks. Maybe less so aggro now you have Kozak's Command, Ugin's Binding, and Dismember, plus 4 Sire in the main deck, so maybe aggro is less of a problem, but, decks that have combo aspects to them are an issue for you. So anyway, next up I've got gameplay so you guys can see the deck in action. Like I said, if you've got any comments or questions about the deck, definitely let me know in the comments, and also, if you have got any solutions for the issues that I mentioned, especially the deck taking too long to close the game out, definitely let me know in the comments. Either way, hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll catch you on the next one. Big up! Okay, so we're on the play here. And yeah, this looks good to me, right? We've got Devourer that can hopefully find us another piece of acceleration and Kozak's Command. I mean, even if we don't find another piece of acceleration, we can just go Kozak's Command on turn 2 if we can imprint the Ugin's Labyrinth here. So we're against the Gigantha deck, which is usually either Jund or Is It Wizards. And I think this hand is pretty decent against either, really. Like, it would kind of suck to lose the Kozak's Command to a Thoughtseize here. We do find an Heirloom off the top, though, which is a pretty decent backup, right? I'm going to imprint the Ugin's Labyrinth on Sire here, because I think, regardless of what we're up against, we likely want to have the Devourer first. Although, having said that, if we're against Is It Wizards, then we probably want to have Sire first. Wow, DRC. So maybe we're against, is it Phoenix, potentially? Either way, since we do have the 7 drops here, we want to exile the DRC and make a token here, and then next turn we can go for Heirloom, and then we're not too far away from being able to cast the Devourer here, which is pretty nice. Wow, Barbarian Ring. So maybe against Madness, or maybe just straight burn here, potentially. See what they discard. Okay, another Fear of Missing Out, so it doesn't really help us figure it out. Wow, another Kozak's Command is pretty nice here. And I think we'll crack the Vista for a forest. And I mean, we could just go for the Kozak's Command now, but I'm pretty confident we're not against a counterspell deck here. So I think I'm just going to ship it back in case they cast, you know, a 3-drop that we really want to be able to kill, or just another 2-drop that we want to be able to answer. I don't think there's much risk for waiting. Not to mention if they try and kill the spawn token with a burn spell here, we can obviously crack it and then pump that mana back into Kozak's Command, so we don't really lose out on the acceleration. So I think it makes more sense to wait here. Wow, Swift Spear. Okay, so it looks like we could be against burn here. And so I think I'm probably more interested in taking out the fear of missing out, in which case I should probably just chump block with the token here, right? We can chump block the Swift Spear, then crack the token to just pump into the Kozak's commands, go X equals 3. And then again, since we've got the Devourer, I do think we want to be making, you know, we want to be ramping here so that we can cast Devourer next turn, take out the Monastery Swift Spear. So we'll shock in the Breeding Pool, cast the Devourer here, get rid of the Swift Spear, and then that should hopefully buy us enough time to, you know, go Heirloom plus Rumble, and then put the Sire into hand to then cast the following turn, which should be, you know, if we resolve Sire against them, that should hopefully be good enough to win. Sire is, you know, these are the sorts of matchups where having Sire in the deck is so important. They are just going face, though, which is the way they probably beat this start from us. Okay, they have another DRC and a Chain Lightning, I believe. See what they do here. I mean, we don't really care as much about the DRC because I don't think they have Delirium yet. Well, they go for Chain Lightning face, which is kind of scary. If they have a hand just full of burn, we might end up losing here before we get to resolve the Sire. But this is kind of the issue with this deck, right? You do give the opponent quite a lot of time because, you know, Devourer just a 6/6. It will take, you know, 3 turns to actually close the game out on its own. So we do find another Devourer, but I think we just want lands here. My plan here is basically just put Sire into hand and be able to cast it next turn. So we'll get an Echoing Cavern, play it, and then we'll just play the second Malevolent Rumble. And getting these spawn tokens in play not only helps to guarantee that we can cast the Sire. Oh, we do find another Null Drifter. But I think it's important. I'm kind of tempted to take the Null Drifter, but it doesn't really speed up our clock by an entire turn cycle. And I am worried here about haste creatures, right? We've already seen Monastery Swift Spear. And so I'm going to take the Breeding Pool here as a backup because I want to be able to block a haste creature and or still be able to cast Sire next turn if they spend their burn spells taking out the spawn tokens, because all this information is face up for the opponent, right? They can see the Sire underneath the Ugin's Labyrinth, they can see the spawn tokens in play, so they could very well use their burn spells to take out the spawn tokens and cut us off the mana for Sire. So I just want to make sure that if they do that, or they do have a haste creature here, we still have a land available to cast the Sire next turn, even though it does deal us 2 damage, which is pretty awkward. Because I feel like if I resolve Sire and don't immediately die, if I can connect with the Sire, I just win the game, basically. And they do have a Swift Spear, so I'm very glad that we did, you know, get the land so that we can block here, and then they would then need 2 burn spells to cut us off casting Sire here, I think. Maybe it's a mistake to crack that spawn token, because if they had a way to give Swift Spear trample, then we'd be in trouble. So now we use the Labyrinth. And now, thankfully, we can just cast the Sire without dealing ourselves any damage. I really don't want to take any unnecessary damage here, if I can avoid it, especially because we know about their Barbarian Ring at the very least, so we're basically at 5. And because Sire is basically completely immune to their red damage-based removal, especially now they're below 7, I'm pretty happy to attack in with the Devourer here. So there's the Barbarian Ring, puts us down to 5. This is going to be close. And they've also got, you know, the Arena of Glory to give stuff haste. Okay, managed to get there. So Sire absolutely soloing that game for me for sure. So, sideboarding, I mean, typically against these sorts of aggro decks, you want to bring in spot removal, but Dismember deals us 4 damage every single time, which is actually going to play more into their hands than help us, I think. So I'm not actually sure we sideboard anything here. We could bring in Torpor Orb maybe, because we've seen Fear of Missing Out. But if that's the only ETB they have, I don't really want to cut any of our proactive game plan, because as we saw game 1 there, Sire is just going to, be the game changer in this matchup, similar to how, it plays out against Izzet Wizards. And so I think, trimming any of the acceleration will mean that we, on average, get to Sire slower. And so, for me, I want to just keep the proactive game plan of the deck intact as much as we can. If we had another piece of removal that didn't deal us 4 damage, then I would definitely bring that in, right? If Fatal Push was castable in this list somehow, or there was another colorless removal spell that didn't also deal us 4 damage, then I would bring it in as well. But specifically against Burn, you want to cut all the cards that deal you damage, apart from your lands, obviously. You can't really cut them, but yeah, definitely don't want to risk bringing in Dismember against a Burn deck. But yeah, if the opponent takes a while to sideboard, I'll just edit it out and we'll go straight into game 2. Okay, so moving into game 2 here, obviously being on the draw is going to be an issue, and I do think Burn as a deck is actually probably pretty decent against us, because I think one of the big weaknesses of the ramp builds of Eldrazi is that you take a while to close the game out, which will give the opponent more opportunities to top deck those last few burn spells to, close the game out. So we do want to make sure we keep fast starts here. This hand is kind of risky in a way because we don't have a second land, but we do have Devourer here. We do have Forest Utopia Sprawl. If we find an Ugin's Labyrinth off the top, then we can accelerate into Sire pretty quickly. Not to mention we already have Sire in hand here, so I'm definitely going to keep this one. But I think how well we do will depend on how we hit off the Devourer. So we don't find an Ugin's Labyrinth, unfortunately, but we do find a second land. And I think I'm going to go for Prismatic Vista because we can then crack that for a waste, which in combination with Talisman will then give us access to Kozak's Command, right? That'll be the 2 colorless sources we need. See what the opponent leads on here. Okay, there is Fear of Missing Out. See what they discard. Okay, just a Barbarian Ring. And then, I'd love to have drawn another land here, but I think just to be mana efficient, I'm just going to go for Adherence Heirloom and see what we find off it. It'd be so great if you could pick up Kozak's Command off Heirloom like you can off the Echoing Cavern, but still, that would be very useful to try and find Sire if we didn't already have it. Okay, there is Monastery Swift Spear, which is kind of scary. See if they fire off burn spells now. Yeah, okay, there's Electrostatic Blast. So already down to 13, which isn't ideal. We do find another piece of acceleration, which is pretty big, though. So now we can go Talisman, into Talisman, and then ship it back. And then we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. So we're one. If we draw an untapped land here, we can just slam Sire, which would be absolutely huge. But we could also be in trouble this turn because they've got the Electrostatic Blast boon there available. So if they have multiple burn spells combined with the prowess of Swift Spear, we could be in trouble here. I mean, especially if they can get Delirium online, then they could make a really powerful Swift Spear and then, make it attack twice. Okay, very happy to see no burn spells. So really, really hope we can find an untapped land here. Okay, there's Skewer the Critics. And they do find another Blast and a Detective's Phoenix, but I mean, thankfully Sire has reach, so we don't need to worry about the Detective's Phoenix as much since it's main phase 2. But yeah, if we don't draw an untapped land, we're in real trouble here. I mean, we could still be dead even through Sire, right? If we cast Sire and they just have another burn spell, we're in trouble. Yikes. Okay, so we didn't find an untapped land, which is pretty unfortunate, but we could potentially mill over a... Oh, we found an Ugin's Labyrinth. Okay, that's huge. I was going to say we could potentially mill over an Ugin's Binding and then bounce their board, but now we actually can cast Sire because we get a token and we can imprint the Ugin's Labyrinth. So now we can just slam the Sire, and I mean, we're still dead to 2 burn spells, right? But if they don't have 2 burn spells, Sire could just save us again here. But yeah, it's that Electrostatic Blast boon that's worrying me, right? If they go face with Chain Lightning, all they need is another blast and we're dead. There is the Chain Lightning. Okay, do they find a piece of burn? Oh, they find a light up the stage. They get another look and they get to surveil with the DRC. Okay, they got Magus of the Moon, which is interesting. I guess we just got to hope they don't find another burn spell in the top 3. And I mean, to be fair, they have got through quite a lot of Chain Lightnings and Electrostatic Blasts already, and there aren't really that many playable burn spells past that. So just got to really hope to not find one here. Oh wow, they're playing Chandra's Incinerator. That's interesting. I've not seen that card in ages. I mean, it shouldn't save them here very much, I don't think. Especially because we've got Devourer in hand as well. Okay, wow, that was close. But yeah, if we hadn't had Sire in the deck, we'd have been in real trouble there. Okay, so we're going second here. And yep, this looks good to me. Right, we've got Sprawl on 1, potentially got access to 4 mana on turn 2 with this Ugin's Labyrinth as well. And we've got Binding for early interaction. So, plus also Echoing Cavern is a way that we can sink mana to find another piece of top end. We found Devourer as well, which is pretty nice. So Dark Slick Shores from the opponent could be a number of things, but if I had to guess, probably just going to be against, you know, just generic Dimir. It's probably the deck I've seen most often recently. Okay, Psychic Frog. So yeah, looks like it probably is Dimir. So, okay, Heirloom's a decent draw here. We could obviously try and bounce the Psychic Frog here. Just to try and, you know, slow the opponent's card advantage engine down a little bit, but that does limit our own proactive game plan in terms of acceleration. So I think what I'm going to do here is, you know, whilst we have 4 mana, and I'm going to exile the Sire so that we have access to the Devourer to try and kill the Psychic Frog, is play both the Heirloom and the Utopia Sprawl, and then we get another creature off the Heirloom, and we should then be able to cast Devourer next turn. And even if the opponent has a counterspell for that, we still get to exile the Psychic Frog unless they're main decking Consign, which I think is pretty unlikely. So we get to seek a card off the Heirloom, and we find a Null Drifter, which is nice with the Ugin's Binding here, right? If they do swarm the board, we could potentially go Binding and Null Drifter in the same turn. And the Heirloom still helps to pay for the Evoke trigger as well, which is nice. So do connect with the Psychic Frog, but we should be able to just remove it with the Devourer next turn, which is a really big deal. Even if they have a counter spell. Okay, so they go for Ponder, which obviously if they find their third land will still enable them to hold mana open for counter spell. Yeah, and there is the third land. Okay, and a second Psychic Frog. Interesting. Wow, okay. Kozak's Command is an interesting draw. So we'll name Eldrazi on the Cavern. And I think I still want to go for the Devourer here because it does kind of stop the second Psychic Frog as well, right? We exile the first one here, obviously, and then if they choose to attack, I'm happy to block and just make them discard their whole hand, basically. Obviously, they can discard and then discard 2 cards to give it flying, but I'm pretty happy for them to just pitch 2 cards in order to continue to attack with the Psychic Frog. Right, they're losing 2 cards just to gain 1, essentially. Oh, wow, Essence Flux. Okay, so it looks like they might be on Aquatic Subtlety, actually, which completely changed how we might want to approach this matchup. I assumed it would just be the generic, you know, Dimir sort of tempo control deck. So, against Aquatic Subtlety, I mean, we definitely just want to start applying pressure here. It looks like they have a slightly slow start by the looks of things, and we don't have the best options for interacting with them, but, you know, between Null Drifter and Binding and Sire, we might actually be able to beat Atraxa. Agent could be tricky if they start stealing stuff here. So, I think what I'm going to do here is set a stop during the opponent's upkeep so that we can exile the Psychic Frog and produce mana, so that we then have mana spare for potentially, you know, putting this Sire in our hand and casting at the same turn, whilst still having mana available for Ugin's Binding. Because obviously it's not great if we bounce the creatures that they give Evoke with off the Aquatic Subtlety, but if they're using Essence Flux to try and steal 2 of our cards, then okay, they're using Essence Flux to protect the Psychic Frog. But yeah, I basically don't want them to steal 2 things off one Evoke trigger if we can avoid it. Now, obviously, again, if they have a second blue card, they can just recast it anyway, but Ugin's Binding is pretty nice to get in the graveyard here as well, because if they do steal our creatures especially, we can just bounce them back to our hand when we cast the Null Drifter to then recast. Okay, Thundertrap Trainer, so they don't have Aquatic Subtlety, which is huge for us. See what they find. Okay, there is the Aquatic Subtlety, so thankfully we don't have to worry about that until next turn, but... And I will bounce the Psychic Frog here, see if they've got another Essence Flux. And if they do have an Essence Flux, I'm kind of happy for them to use it to protect the Psychic Frog rather than to get another trigger off the Thundertrap Trainer. Okay, interesting. So I think I'm going to attack first here, because if they let the damage through, then they're down to 7 and they don't have enough life to pay the ward on the Sire, which is what they go for here. So now we can go put the Sire into hands, put this Multiversal Passage on green, cast the Sire, and now if they do have Agent of Treachery, they don't have enough life to steal it. And we still have Null Drifter available next turn in order to, you know, bounce the whole board. So there is the Aquatic Subtlety. I'm a little bit concerned about Atraxa here, but we are pretty far ahead on board. They don't really have good ways to gain life outside of attacking with Atraxa, which would be an extra turn cycle later. And that requires them to have Essence Flux when they've already used a couple already. And so Sire, you know, whilst they're on 7 life, is a really big deal in this game. And I think we were quite lucky here that they had a slower start, because game 1, this is probably one of our trickier matchups, if I had to guess. Post-sideboard, we do have decent tools, though. Torpor Orb does let them keep Atraxa in play for free, basically, but it also makes Agent of Treachery basically useless. And shuts off Thundertrap Trainer as well. And we obviously have Test of Talents as well, which is absolutely phenomenal in this matchup. Well, it doesn't stop Necromancy, which is a bit of a concern. They don't find Essence Flux off the Atraxa ETB, so if they don't have one in hand, which I think isn't that likely considering they've already used 2, right? So if Atraxa just dies here, I think we're pretty well set up to win next turn, unless they happen to have, you know, another creature in their hand when they use Aquatic Subtlety, like another Atraxa or an Agent of Treachery, maybe. So opponent in the tank here. I don't know what about. Surely if they had Essence Flux, they would use it here. Although even then, they're not in a great position, I don't think. Oh, well, they did have Agent. But again, they can't really steal Sire here because it would kill them. And if they steal Devourer, it will go over to their side tapped. And we can obviously bounce Devourer back to our hand with the Ugin's Binding from the graveyard as well. Oh, well, they did have Essence Flux, so they were in the tank about whether to blink the Agent or not. So I'm very glad that we made the 2 extra spawn tokens here. And again, this is the really nice thing about having Echoing Cavern in the mana base. Making extra mana is pretty safe because you always, you know, you don't have to worry about casting your 7 drops with it, and then you can use Echoing Cavern if you do end up, you know, getting stuck in terms of not having enough top ends. Now, even though they stole a land with 2 Utopia Sprawls on, we can just bounce their entire board and just attack in for lethal with Sire. So yeah, very lucky game 1 that they had a slower start, because I think game 1, this is probably a very favourable matchup for them. Post-sideboard, though, we get Ghost Vacuum for Necromancy, Torpor Orb for Aquatic Subtlety and Agent of Treachery, and Test of Talents as well. So it's not like we were super hard targeting them, and I think I'm also going to trim one more card to get the Ghost Vacuum in, because obviously the weakness of Test of Talents is it doesn't stop Necromancy because it's an enchantment, whereas Ghost Vacuum obviously does. And also Ghost Vacuuming Agent of Treacheries and then getting to 6 mana and cracking it is going to be really brutal as well if that comes up. So kind of rough for the opponent that our sideboard incidentally happens to really hit Aquatic Subtlety, where previous, you know, pre-ban Eldrazi sideboards probably wouldn't have been anywhere near this bad, I don't think. So this hand we can go Talisman on turn 2, but on the draw I think that's just too slow. Not to mention that we're relying on the talismans here to produce green mana. We don't have a Forest for Utopia Sprawl. So even though we have Test of Talents, I think this is probably a little bit too slow. If one of these lands was a forest, then I would snap keep this, because then we go Sprawl 1 and then have Test of Talents available. This hand is obviously very slow, and I wouldn't normally keep this. I would absolutely not keep this hand game 1. But because we have so many effective sideboard cards in Ghost Vacuum, Test of Talents, and we have the mana to cast it, I'm going to keep this hand and hope that Devourer gets us to one of the sideboard cards. But it is a risky keep. I just don't think... I mean, maybe we're supposed to go down to 5, but especially against the deck that I know is likely to be bringing Thoughtseize against us, I think we're just trying to ride the Devourer to a good sideboard card here. Yeah, opponent takes the Null Drifter, but really hope we find a good sideboard card. And there's the Test of Talents. That's why I kept this hand. Again, not 100% sure it was the correct pick, but assuming they are going in on an Aquatic Subtlety opening, having Test of Talents should hopefully buy us time. Oh, okay, there's the second Thoughtseize. That's a bit unfortunate. So yeah, now we're really reliant on the top of our library. It wouldn't surprise me if we ended up losing this one. I mean, this was a risky keep, but I don't think we can keep that 7 on the draw. And wow, okay, nothing on turn 3. And we do find a Rumble off the top. So I think I'm going to crack this to get a waste, so that we have one of the 2 colorless sources for Kozilek's Command. And then... going to make sure that we've got blue available here, just in case. I mean, we obviously won't find Test of Talents, but it might make the opponent play around it at the very least. You know, they don't know that the third card in our hand is Sire. Okay, there's Sink into Stupor. Interesting. Wow, another tap land. So opponents kept a very slow hand here by the looks of things. So we go for Rumble. That resolves without any question. And then I think with the 7 drops in our hand, we have to just keep getting lands. But now having Test of Talents open is going to be very nice. I am still pretty soft here to Necromancy. It'd be interesting to see what the opponent's hand is here, though, because, yeah, just not doing anything for the first few turns. It looks like they've kept a pretty risky one. We are 1 land away from casting a 7-drop here, though, and we can start using these caverns to get more cards. It would be great if we find a Kozilek's Command off one of these. Yeah, I'd be fascinated to know what the opponent's hand is. Maybe they just kept it off the back of double thoughts. He's hoping to draw into something, but... Okay, ship it back again. I mean, this game hasn't been particularly interesting. Just 2 Thoughtseizes and then basically nothing for the rest of the game. I am starting to worry about Hardcast Agent of Treachery, though. But yeah, I'm just trying to think what they could have in hand here. Okay, so we 7-drop Tribal over here. And we can cast a 7-drop here. But do we risk it? I feel like they either have a really clunky hand kept off the back of 2 Thoughtseizes, or they're waiting for me to tap out and they're worried about Test of Talents now they've seen it. And so since I'm not going to play the Sire, it was obviously a misplay to shock the Multiversal Passage in. But I'm just going to wait here, I think, until I can cast a 7-drop and hold up Test of Talents, because other than Tainted Indulgence, they don't really have very much that they can do at instant speed. So if they're not doing anything during their turn, I don't think we really have to worry. Oh, okay, there is the Tainted Indulgence, so... I mean, if they have Necromancy, we're in trouble here. But yeah, this has just been a really weird game. I think we both just kept pretty sketchy hands by the looks of things. Wow, they don't discard a creature. Okay, I'm pretty happy about that. I mean, yeah, if we'd found a Kozilek's Command off one of those Cavern activations, this game would look very different, I think. Okay, there is Aquatic Subtlety, so we'll get to see what they had in hand here if this resolves. Unless they're running something different. I'm just assuming they're on my 75, but they might not be. Wow, okay. So they have the cards for Subtlety and just didn't have Subtlety itself. Looks like they are on my build, so that's good to know. And they don't have a way to discard a card for Necromancy, but they are pretty close to the Hardcast Agent of Treachery. And this is pretty sketchy because obviously at 14 life they can steal the Sire. So maybe I'm supposed to play Devour, actually. Maybe that was a misplay because they've got Sink into Stupor in hand. They have the land drop to go. Agent of Treachery here. So maybe I misplayed, but We do have another Sire here, but they also have the Essence Flux. So, I'm going to go for the other Sire here because they're at 7. Oh, sorry, they're at 4. They don't have 7 life to pay. If they attack, I double block, and then both Sires just cancel each other out. And if they don't attack, they don't have enough life to pay for the Essence. For the Agent of Treachery trigger anyway. And I don't think they can Essence Flux the Sire because I believe it will re-enter play under my control. Might be wrong about that, but... So yeah, we do... Maybe that was a misplay. Maybe I'm supposed to use Devourer on the Agent while they were tapped out. That was probably the best play. So yeah, I think I've misplayed here. Now, unfortunately, we can't use the Devourer while they've got the mana open because they'll just Essence Flux in response. So maybe... Yeah, I think I did misplay here, unfortunately. I'm going to ship it back, and I think I'll just go for Kozek's Command here, though. Get a bunch of mana, and then we can, Devour and Sire in the same turn, potentially. Okay, we'll just take the 2 damage here. But yeah, I think I was probably supposed to Devour the turn they were tapped out. Okay, there is Ponder. So I am starting to get worried about Necromancy, but now, if they tried to Necromancy this turn, we would have Kozek's Command to exile the graveyard. There is Necromancy. I guess they can Necromancy my own creature here. They can take the Sire from the graveyard. So, I think with all these 7-drops in hand, I'm just going to exile my graveyard to stop Necromancy being a good option out of the 7-drops that I've got. And then just make a bunch of spawn tokens. And then we'll exile Sire. So yeah, we'll basically just exile all of the creatures from my graveyard here, which happens to be exactly 6, which, but that works out well for us. So now, for their future Necromancies to be good, they'll then have to find another Psychic Frog or a Tainted Indulgence in order to use this Atraxa. Okay, Utopia Sprawl's nice, so we can basically cast this for free. And I think I'll put it on blue, but maybe that was a misplay because now they can... Presumably they'll want to steal one of my lands because we'll Devour here, try and kill the Agent, and they'll blink in response, and then they'll get an extra land, which is a little bit annoying, so... Yeah, I think I'm supposed to wait on the Utopia Sprawl here, actually. They could also try and take one of my caverns. Yeah, they take the land with the Utopia Sprawl on. So yeah, that was a slight mistake. So I made a couple mistakes this game. I think the main one, looking back on it, is probably the one where we cast the second Sire instead of exiling the Agent, but I still managed to get there. Weird game, though. Okay, so we're on the play here. And yeah, this looks good to me. Right, we've got Imprinted Ugin's Labyrinth into Talisman on turn 1, into Kozek's Command on turn 2, plus we get the filtering off Devourer, which, it's between Sire and Ugin's Binding, I think, but considering we already have Kozek's Command as early interaction, I think I like keeping Sire as, additional top end, and then, assuming we don't get Thought Seized here, we can potentially go Kozek's Command, make 2 tokens, and then just cast the Sire next turn. So I'm going to crack this and grab a forest here, and then, since I'm not sure what the opponent's on, Colony Garden makes me think Yawgmoth, so we probably don't need to do this now, and maybe we're supposed to wait so that we can potentially exile an opponent's creature, but when we don't know what they're going to be on, I would rather do this before they get access to a counterspell, potentially. But yeah, again, maybe because they're on Colony Garden, that's very unlikely. Okay, there is Badger Mole Cub, so maybe I'm supposed to hold Kozek's Command, exile that, and make 2 tokens, but then I wouldn't have access to the Devourer here. Okay, Utopia Sprawl, so that's basically free to cast here, right? And I think we'll put this on blue. And then I think we're probably forced to go for the Devourer, so yeah, I think I did maybe make a mistake here going for the Kozek's Command too early, but you never know on the ladder what people are running. I thought, in the dark it's safer to just go for that first, and we're still, because of the Utopia Sprawl, pretty close to going for Sire. Wow, okay, yeah, opponent just scoops up, but we did have a pretty ridiculously fast start there. So, Yawgmoth, Torpor Orb is useful, Pithing Needle even better, and then I also think we probably want Dismember here. In terms of cuts, I mean, it's tricky to say. Maybe we don't, because I think Ugin's Binding is probably better than Dismember here, and I don't really think we can afford to cut anything else. So we're basically, you know, removing a bit of ramp from the deck in order to fit the hate cards in. On Dismember versus Ugin's Binding, I mean, there is a discussion to be had there about which one's better, but, you know, if we can get an early Ugin's Binding and bounce all their mana dorks and small creatures before they can land a Yawgmoth, then that puts us really in the driving seat. But I could definitely see an argument for Dismember to take out their early acceleration and slow them down that way instead. But it's pretty close. So yeah, if the opponent takes a while to sideboard, I'll just edit it out and we can go straight into game 2. Okay, so going into game 2 here, obviously, you know, it's very unlikely we're going to get a start that fast again, but, you know, it's kind of lucky that we did manage to steal game 1, because I do think Yawgmoth pre-sideboard is probably a tricky matchup, but, oh wow, we do actually have a turn 1 Talisman again here, which is pretty crazy. Okay, Ignoble Hierarch. I think we go for the Malevolent Rumble here, right? We've already got an Ugin's Binding, and we're gonna use this Devourer to imprint on the Ugin's Labyrinth here. So I think we want to try and use this Malevolent Rumble to both accelerate and find, you know, accelerate into and find another piece of top end. Okay, there's Sephiroth. See if they sack the Ignoble Hierarch. Okay, they choose not to, which makes sense. Again, Utopia Sprawl should be pretty free to cast here, right, because we can use the mana off the Talisman to cast it. And I think we'll go for green. And I actually think I'm going to use the Ugin's Binding on the Ignoble Hierarch here. Right, delays hardcast Yawgmoth by another turn, and also means that if we do find a 7-drop off the Malevolent Rumble, we've already got a Binding in the graveyard to bounce their whole board. Although actually, I guess they could still cast Yawgmoth here. Oh no, that's an Urborg. For a second there, I thought they had a Phyrexian Tower, but... Virulent Emissary is interesting. I guess that's in the Prosperous Innkeeper slot. See if they suck that to the Sephiroth here. Oh wow, they choose to sack the Hierarch instead. Wasn't expecting that. But I guess they've already got a decent amount of mana already. Ooh, okay, Pithing Needle off the top is really nice. I'm going to lead on the Malevolent Rumble though, just to see what we hit. Don't find a 7-drop, which is a bit annoying, but we do mull over another Ugin's Binding, and thankfully we also have an Echoing Cavern here that we can exhaust to find a 7-drop, but getting Pithing Needle down this turn is going to be huge. Name the Yawgmoth, and then unless they have, you know, a way to tutor for an out to it, or they have Agatha's Soul Cauldron and a way to get Yawgmoth in the graveyard, that should shut off the main combo aspect of their deck, which is the main thing we're worried about. And we can also now put Devourer back into our hand, and we should have enough mana to cast that next turn as well, to not only exile their most problematic thing, but bounce the rest of it as well. So even without the Echoing Cavern, I think we should be alright here. Okay, there is a Halfling. Wonder if they'll sack that to the Sephiroth. Wow, okay, and Marionette Apprentice. So that is a concern because they can, you know, deal a lot of chip damage to me, even if I get the Devourer down here. I mean, thankfully, bouncing their whole board should make a big difference, but, you know, they're going to get in for 4 here, plus an extra 2 if they sacrifice a creature. So we do need to be careful of our life total here for sure. So we do go down to 6. See if they have another 1-drop as well. Okay, no, just a forest. So we'll return the Devourer here, and then I think... Oh, wow, okay, second Devourer. So I was kind of thinking about taking out the Marionette Apprentice because it's easier to recast and gives them an extra body. But now that we've got a second Devourer, I think I like taking out the Sephiroth first because, you know, it's much more of an engine card, and now we have you know, we have a backup way to remove the Marionette Apprentice, so we don't have to worry as much about the chip damage next turn, even if they do recast everything. I think it makes more sense to do it this way round. And then, yeah, if they just recast everything, the next turn we'll just use the second Devourer, exile the Marionette Apprentice, and then... Oh, they do find a Haywire Mite and a Boseiju, so they do have ways to take out the Pithing Needle to get Yawgmoth back online here. But yeah, I was going to say, it'd be interesting to see. There is a chance here that I don't use the second Ugin's Binding, but presumably they cast Marionette Apprentice here, and then we can't really attack because of the Virulent Emissary, so... Yeah, we'll see what we draw first, but... Okay, just a land. So we'll go for the Ugin's Labyrinth. I don't want to use this Vista if I can avoid it, because my life total is very, you know, something I've got my eye on here. So we'll exile the Marionette Apprentice first, and then I think I will bounce everything here because, you know, we get to get rid of 2 tokens for free. If they have Yawgmoth, that's 2 extra bodies they can sacrifice. So even though they do get to recast the Emissary, we should be ahead on board here. We can obviously use the Echoing Cavern to get another 7-drop, which maybe is another Devourer to clear it, or could be a Null Drifter as well. Okay, there's Delighted Halfling. There's Ignoble Hierarch. Okay, and they just ship it back. Oh, there is Null Drifter off the top. Okay, so we don't even need to use the Echoing Cavern this turn, which is nice. So I'll draw, see what we find first. And then, I think with a Null Drifter in play, I'm happy to attack with both. Right, having 2 Devourers in play is nice here, because presumably they will block with the Emissary. But we shouldn't have to worry about them attacking back this turn, right? Yawgmoth isn't a deck that has a lot of haste creatures. They do have chord for X equals 2, though. I wonder what this is going to be. Wow, Hepatra. I mean... They've only got 1 card in hand, so if that 1 card is Yawgmoth, they're not going to be able to use it, right? Okay, there is Yawgmoth, but maybe the opponent's forgotten that I've got Pithing Needle, because it doesn't really make sense for them to get Hepatra. I'm going to mouse over it just in case the opponent doesn't understand, but... Or has forgotten, but... yeah, Hepatra doesn't really make sense unless Yawg is online, so I presume they just forgot about Pithing Needle. Okay, there is Badgermole Cub. Wow, okay. Sire off the top is nice. Again, we could have got it off Echoing Cavern, but that does make attacking a little bit freer with the Null Drifter here. I do want to hold the Devourer back, because even though Yawgmoth is shut off, we could obviously still die to them just attacking us, but now with the lifelink off Sire, and I think just generally Sire is really difficult for Yawg to deal with, because the Ward 7 means it can't really be killed or even targeted by Yawg at all. Not to mention, if we connect with 1 swing, we then don't really have to worry about Marionette Apprentice or Sephiroth just draining us out. Okay, yeah, opponent just keeps it up, so we got there. Nice. Okay, so we're going second here. And yeah, I think we can keep this right. We've got Devourer, which can potentially find us Utopia Scroll. We've got Rumble as well, which accelerates and can hopefully find some other lands or acceleration depending on what we're missing by turn 2. So let's see what the opponent's on here. Okay, Young Wolf, so it looks like Yawgmoth again. And, I mean, honestly, at this point, I'm just looking for lands, I think. More acceleration is nice, but we obviously need the lands to keep casting it, so... So yeah, we'll just play Breeding Pool taps. Next turn will almost certainly be Malevolent Rumble. There is Badgermole Cub, so... Opponent could be off to a fast start here. Okay, another Devourer. See what we find off the Rumble here. Love to mill over an Ugin's Labyrinth. Okay, definitely going to take the Echoing Cavern here, because that gives us a mana sink later in the game and gives us a second colourless source for both Devourer of Destiny and Kozilek's Command if we draw it. And then I really hope the opponent doesn't get York down early here, because if they struggle to get York down, we can potentially go Ugin's Binding into Null Drifter. Okay, Zulaport Cutthroat is actually good to know about. Oh, we do find an Ugin's Labyrinth as well, which is nice. But yeah, Cutthroat's nice to know about because it means that if that's their finisher, which I presume it is, they don't tend to run more than one, but we don't need to worry about our spawn tokens dealing us damage. So here, I think I'm just going to main phase bounce the Badgermole Cub here just to deny them acceleration. And then next turn, I mean, likely we're going to have to just go for the Null Drifter. Obviously, if we draw another Ugin's Labyrinth, we could go for either Sire or Devourer here. Or I guess Null Drifter as well. But yeah, we basically just want to bounce their whole board if we can. Okay, there is Yawgmoth, which isn't great. Especially because if they find a second Yawgmoth, we're just dead on the spot here because they already have Zulaport Cutthroat in play. See if they end up trying to take out the token here. I mean, at least we can sacrifice the token to deny them the card draw here. And again, because Cutthroat isn't Blood Artist, we don't have to worry about dealing ourselves damage from the spawn tokens either. So now we definitely have to rely on Null Drifter to bounce their board. But, I mean, unfortunately, they can just recast the Yawgmoth, but they're going to have less material in play to use with it, which is, you know, nice for us at least. So we bounce everything. Obviously, they keep the Swamp in play because it's a land. And then we can go Malevolent Rumble. And this is pretty nice as well because it hopefully means that... Okay, what do we want here? I mean, I think I'm just going to go for another land here, right? We are going to be able to accelerate into a 7-drop off the spawn token here. Possibly. So having just enough lands to be able to hardcast 7-drops without relying on the spawn token is quite important, I think. I think there's a chance they might just go Yawgmoth, sack the land to get rid of the spawn token, which would be a little bit annoying, but at the very least, we've still got Null Drifter that can draw us 2 here. Okay, yeah, they can go Badgermole Cub and still have enough mana here to go for York. Which they do. Presumably they take out the spawn token. Okay, they do have another land. See if they've got a 1-drop as well. I mean, I'd love for them to let the spawn token live, and then we can just go straight for Devourer. Okay, they do go for Yawgmoth, not a surprise. And yeah, it does look like they're trying to take out the spawn token here, which makes sense. But again, we can deny them the card draw here. So love to find a Labyrinth off the top. Fortunately, don't find one here, so I think we're going to have to lead on the Null Drifter. I mean, we could go for the Echoing Cavern as well, but, you know, if we happen to draw another Ugin's Binding or a Kozilek's Command, that would be useful to cast this turn as well. Okay, I think we might just be dead here. Right, because we don't have any way to get on the board. If we do crack this fetch to cast the... we don't have a spare forest. I thought we had another forest in the deck to be able to use Utopia Sprawl, so that was also a misplay on my part. So, yeah, I think we're probably just dead here, right? Because they've got Zulaport Cutthroat. They can just attack in for a decent amount and then just sack their board with the Cutthroat in play to deal us the last bits of damage. But thankfully, this is a matchup which does get better post-sideboard. I want the Torpor Orb, the Pithing Needle, and I think I'm going to try Dismember over Binding here. I have, because I was pretty unsure about which was best the last time I played Yawgmoth, and Binding was good when we got it off early, but the more I played this matchup, I do think Dismember is likely better. Because, you know, as you saw last game, Binding was just too slow, right? I would rather stop them casting the Yawgmoth early on than waiting for it to get in play and then trying to bounce everything. I think, yeah, Dismember should be better. Obviously, Dismember can also just deal with Yawgmoth for good, right? And typically, we are a deck that oftentimes won't have any creatures in play for them to get value off it before it dies as well. So, yeah, the more I played the matchup, I do think Dismember is likely better than Ugin's Binding. But yeah, I do think we should be in a much better shape post-sideboard when we do have Torpor Orb, we do have Pithing Needle, and we have Dismember as well. Yeah, if the opponent takes a while to sideboard, we'll just edit it out and get straight into game 2. Okay, so going into game 2, I do think the matchup should be quite a lot better post-sideboard when we have our sideboard cards, and obviously being on the play is going to be a pretty big advantage here as well. So this hand looks pretty good, right? We can Dismember turn 1 if they have a 1-mana mana dork, and then we can go Malevolent Rumble 2 into potentially Kozak's Command on 3, which is a pretty decent curve out, especially if we find a 7-drop off the Rumble. Right, we could potentially use Kozak's Command to exile something and produce tokens to then accelerate into our 7-drop. So I'm going to lead on Prismatic Vista. I don't want to lead on, Untapped Breeding Pool because that kind of telegraphs interaction. But maybe I'm overthinking it. But yeah, we'll grab I think I'm going to get a waste here because of the Kozak's Command, right? We want to make sure that we can still cast Kozak's Command even if they have a way to remove the Malevolent Rumble token. And since I don't, there's obviously a chance that we mill over our basics, or, we mill over both forests or the island. I want to crack the Vista now. And yeah, we did mill over one of the forests, so kind of glad that we did do that first. And then I think I'll grab the Talisman here. Again, helps to bridge the gap between now and our 7-drops, which we should be able to find off the Echoing Cavern, even if we don't draw one in time. Okay, opponent on Thoughtseize, which is interesting. And they're on Spymaster's Vault, which isn't a card I normally see in Yawgmoth. Presumably the opponent takes the Kozak's Command here, though, I'd imagine. Or maybe the Rumble, but Kozak's Command definitely the most powerful card. Yeah, they do take the Kozak's Command. And they do have a Hierarch, so they can potentially cast Yawg next turn. Okay, another Talisman's interesting. So I think I'm going to lead on the Rumble just to see what we find. Maybe I'm supposed to lead on the Talismans first, but I want to get a better idea of what we're trying to sequence into. And I think I'm going to take another land here. Although maybe I'm supposed to take... Yeah, maybe that was a misplay. Maybe I'm supposed to take Utopia Sprawl, because then we could have cast it off the Talisman this turn. And then we could have cast a 7-drop next turn. Yeah, that was a misplay on my part. I should have taken Utopia Sprawl there. Looks like opponent also made a mistake, though, on this. Okay, yeah, maybe they just don't have another card to accelerate into. Oh, yeah, okay. If I hadn't made that misplay, we could have cast Sire this turn. But, I mean, at least we can use the Echoing Cavern. But, yeah, I definitely picked wrong off the Malevolent Rumble there. Wow, Shifting Woodland as well. Opponent's kind of teched out with the lands here. Yeah, really hope that misplay doesn't come back to bite me. 4 mana. Is this Yawg? Oh, 5 mana. But yeah, our turn should be pretty simple here. Okay, there is the Yawg, but thankfully Sire of 7 Deaths is actually pretty good in this matchup. Because Yawgmoth can't really do anything to it, and, it's going to undo a lot of their chip damage that they're presumably going to try and set up with stuff like Marionette Apprentice and, we saw, Blood Artist style effects. We do find Kozak's Command, which we can obviously use here to take out the Yawg. But honestly, unless they have a way to combo off, I think Sire is just the play here, right? They can't use Yawg to kill it. And the earlier we start connecting with it, the earlier, it just makes it really difficult for them to beat us without setting up their combo, which they're not really close to setting up, right? They would need double Young Wolf plus a Blood Artist style effect. Okay, there's Halfling. I mean, I guess there's a chance they might have boarded in interaction against us, but I guess Grist actually is a potential issue, right? If they have, they can Zenith for Grist, and then sack one of their creatures to remove the Sire. So maybe I'm supposed to use Kozak's Command instead, and then we can Kozak's Command make a bunch of tokens to just chump block their other creatures. But having said that, if they don't have a way to get to Grist, then Sire is the much better long-term play, and it looks like they're just digging for cards here, right? They're having to take out their own creatures because they can't target the Sire. And the more of their own creatures they take out, the worse Grist is going to be when they do, or if they do eventually find it. Wow, they kill their whole board. So now if they do go for Grist, they'd have to sack the Yawg, which is obviously not very good for them. But yeah, maybe I did play a little bit too quickly there. Oh, wow, okay, there's the Spymaster's Vault. I mean, thankfully, we should still be good because even if they make Yawgmoth 8 power to be able to block the Sire here, we can just remove it with the Kozilek's command anyway. And not to mention, they would have to discard all non-lands in order to make it that big, which would hopefully then leave them without much gas left in their hand. Okay, they only make it a 7 toughness creature. I mean, I say only, that's obviously pretty big, but thankfully not that great to block. Oh, there is the Grist. So yeah, maybe I did misplay. Maybe I'm supposed to go for the Kozilek's command instead here. But we can still take out the Yawg. They don't have any other creatures in play. Wow, we do find an Ugin's Labyrinth, which means that we can go for Yawg. Oh, sorry, we can go for Kozilek's commands for... Oh, I'm trying to work it out. I think it's worth doing it here because this just gives us extra tokens, which can be used for blocking. They can be used for accelerating into the Null Drifter at worst case scenario. So yeah, well, X equals 7, remove the Yawg. I mean, yeah, looking back on it, I mean, it's tough to say because it's not great just using the spawn tokens that we would have created to chump block their other creatures, but if they'd happened to have a Green Sun Zenith or Grist in their hand before they sacked all their other creatures, then we would have probably just been dead on board anyway, so... Yeah, I think I did maybe make a mistake. I probably should have used Kozilek's command first and then gone for Sire afterwards. But again, if they have a backup Yawg, then that line is worse. So I guess, yeah, it's risk and reward both ways. But I definitely should have thought about it a little bit more because I didn't consider Grist until I'd already cast the Sire. So we'll see what else they've got here. And they are also reasonably close to... Oh, they did have a backup Yawg. Okay. So maybe it did work out better that I cast the Sire first. I'll definitely watch this game back later and see. Do you find a Null Drifter off the top, though, which means we don't have to waste, you know, essentially 3 mana to get the one from out under Ugin's Labyrinth, which is nice. And we obviously have enough mana to cast whatever we draw here. Bit unfortunate here that that we just drew 2 lands, but we still do have... the Cavern available, I believe. So we'll see what they do with Grist here. Because I think if they don't find a piece of removal, they're probably forced to minus the Grist to kill the Null Drifter here, because they're down to 4 because of the ward on Sire. But that would be great for us, because then they lose the Grist, they lose the token as well. And then we've got, you know, a bunch of chump blockers in play from the Kozilek's command, and we've still got Null Drifter under the Ugin's Labyrinth as well. Yeah, they do sack the Grist here. Take out the Null Drifter. They do have Shifting Woodland online now, but I don't think there's anything in their graveyard we need to be too worried about, right? If they obviously use this on the Grist, it would just die immediately and lose them the Woodlands, so the only things we're really worried about here are Young Wolf potentially, or the you know, Blood Artist, Zulaport Cutthroat style effects. So now we can... Oh, wait, have we used this already? Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, of course, the turn that we accidentally... Oh, the turn I should have used Sprawl, we used the Cavern instead. I forgot about that. But thankfully we still do have the Null Drifter under the Ugin's Labyrinth, which can set up lethal if they do... Well, obviously if they find enough creatures they can kill it, but, you know, they're at 4 life. Null Drifter is a 4 toughness creature, so... You know, they'd have to find some sort of life gain beforehand for that to work. Okay, there's the Spymaster's Vault, so they're going to use Yawgmoth to grow again, but thankfully we have a bunch of chump blockers in play, so don't need to be worried too much about them attacking with the Yawgmoth here, I don't think. Oh, there's another Sire off the top. Okay, sick. So I think I want to make sure, if we can, to not use the Ugin's Labyrinth here so that we can potentially put the Null Drifter into hand and cast it next turn. And then we don't want to take any unnecessary damage here because Obviously, they could put, a Blood Artist style creature into play. I think from game 1 we saw they were on Zulaport Cutthroat, which is a really big deal at the moment, right? Because it would mean that we don't need to worry about sacrificing the spawn tokens and taking damage off them. So I actually think we're in a pretty good spot here, assuming the opponent's not also running Blood Artist, which I think is pretty unlikely, right? For years now, Yawgmoth has typically only run one Blood Artist style effect as a win condition. So they've only got one card left in hand. And if they don't find a way to remove this Sire somehow, we should just win next turn, right? Not to mention we've got access to Null Drifter here as well. Okay, they crack the Vista. Just trying to check their graveyard to make sure they haven't got anything they can copy with Woodland that's relevant at the moment. Yeah, it all just comes down to what their last card in hand is. Chord for X equals 4. I mean, I'm going to risk they don't have Blood Artist, right? If we didn't know what they were running as their win condition, then I think I'm probably supposed to crack all my spawn tokens now. Because otherwise, if they fetch Blood Artist here, they could go sack the Outland Liberator, target your spawn token. Even if I sack, I'm taking 2 damage out of that, and then they sack the Blood Artist and I'm dead. And I was trying to think of other 4-mana cards they could have got there. Wow, okay, yeah, so because they're running Cutthroat. Yeah, so maybe, actually, again, probably a slight misplay from me because I don't know what their deck list was, and there is a chance they were running Blood Artist, so maybe I'm supposed to just crack all my spawn tokens there. Okay, yeah, got there in the end, but made a few misplays there that hopefully we'll learn from going into Game 3. So I actually quite liked how we sideboarded there. We didn't actually draw Dismember, but again, I feel like, having played this matchup a little bit more, I do feel like Dismember should be more effective. Looks like the opponent's in the tank again, so if they do take a while to sideboard, I'll just edit it out again and we can get straight into Game 3. Okay, so Game 3, obviously being on the draw is going to be a slight disadvantage, but we do have a lot of good hate cards in this matchup, and we do find a couple of them off the bat here. One-landers, especially without Utopia Sprawl, are very risky, but if we can find an Ugin's Labyrinth off either of these Devourers, we can go turn 1 Torpor Orb, turn 2 Null Drifter, which is one of the best openings that you can have, especially in matchups where Torpor Orb is effective. And there we go, straight off the bat, perfect. So now we've got the Ugin's Labyrinth. So we'll imprint with the Devourer, get down that turn 1 Torpor Orb, which is really big because it now shuts off Badgermole Cub. And, if we had to wait until turn 2, they could have gone Badgermole Cub and had access to 4 mana immediately, which is a really big difference in this matchup, right? We want to delay them getting to Yawg as much as we can. Okay, so they attack him with the Young Wolf, see what else they got here. Oh, yikes, thought so. So presumably they take the Null Drifter here. I guess they could also take Dismember, maybe. But it's pretty risky unless they also have a piece of removal for the Null Drifter. I mean, I guess maybe they think that they can, play through the Annihilator because of Young Wolf, right? That buys them 2 attacks, but... Oh, wow, they take the Malevolent Rumble. That's interesting. I mean, I'm very happy to get the Null Drifter off here. Unless they have an instant speed way to remove the Torpor Orb, maybe. But yeah, either way, we get to draw here. And the Null Drifter in place straight away. One of the best opens that you can get with this deck. It's so strong. But yeah, again, because of the persist on the Young Wolf, or because they'll get it back, maybe that's why they thought they could play through Null Drifter early on. They do have the Badgermole Cub, so Torpor Orb putting in work here. Yeah, okay, opponent just scoops it up. So we got there, nice.